So, yes. Rommel, and this is something that's a bit screwy with this AI, and I will call out things when I see them with any of these games. And forgetting who it was, also noticed the AI sending this. I think Rommel may be no longer in command here. I don't know, but this unit out here on its own as well. So to play a normal nowadays don't have the skill for anything more than that in these games anymore. Yeah, well, it's a combination of things. As I know, Yogdog has actually a lot more streaming experience in numbers of hours more than I do. So I only do it 2 days a week. Concentrating on the game while trying to interact with the chat, keep the chatting voice going to the people, takes a certain amount of energy. Hey, Ferro Shield, good to have you here. So yeah, so it's, you know, you play on the difficulty level that should give you challenge, okay? And that's sort of the important part. You know, I gotta just say a big thank you to Kasserine and Matrix. I mean, they're basically more or less the same company now, just two brandings, but they both have a good history that I think it's important, that is important, because we are seeing here these games are important, not just to me, but I think to everyone. They allow us to interact with history. You have a very detailed, realistic game in War in the East 2 that you just watched Yogdog play. This is less realistic, but still very evocative of, the whole Kasserine Pass and actions like that. You play Hitman or Rocket League or, League of Legends or whatever. They're fun games. They're great games. I'm not in any way trying to knock them, but play a lot of Rocket League, well, what do you learn? You learn how to play a lot of Rocket League, and that's great. Hey, Chrono Knight. And, that's all great. But here, get to learn and interact with history. So I find, Matrix Kasserine very, very important for that, and I'm very appreciative of that. Okay, well, so like I was saying, there's a bit of a problem with the AI here, and I'll talk about this. And now I say that it's just comparing it to what we might expect a human to be doing. And I've noticed that with this scenario is a lack of well-coordinated moves. Like I was saying, Rommel charges up here. He charged right up along here. I forget who it was. Not Beam Slam. Blocking on the name. Van Bishop, I believe it was. Van Bishop said that in his game he came up along here all on his own. Now I just had at the time one parachute airborne unit that I just left here because I knew it was an important victory hex, and had I not had a reserve here, they would have at least temporarily taken that. But we can see here a bunch of German infantry, well, engineers and whatnot. I know there's some Italians down here. There's some Germans in here, and there's a bunch of Germans over here. We just don't see a well-coordinated infantry. Well, very good, Chronite. And, I've played a bit of War in the East too. I really like that type of game, but as one of the commenters was saying, it's a game that takes a lot of devotion of time and energy to it. So, especially if you're going to play the grand campaign, you just don't play it casually. Where like this is a game that you can get in and play it casually, not casualty, that's being hurt. No, casually. And that's for several ways. One, shorter scenarios, but two, the learning process is a lot less. You don't have to go through as much to learn it. Yeah, War in the East 2 is hard. It is a very good game. I love those type of games. I don't play them as much as I want to, is because of time, of, like I say, get in, one, the energy to get in and learn it well, and then two, to be able to play it and to get through the whole campaign and keep it flowing and nice, and not just play it and then not play it for 2 or 3 weeks and then jump back into it, and as you sort of continue it. So I love those. I've been playing a bit of just the smaller scenarios, but decisive campaigns, Ardennes Offensive, and that's another really good game and that I'm really enjoying. It's as detailed, I would say, as a bit different, but more or less as detailed as, with dealing with individual equipment and whatnot as War in the East 2, but it's a much smaller scale, even if you're playing the sort of grand campaign of the Ardennes Offensive, not just one of the smaller scenarios. So these are all really good. Almost like a study, but gives you a lot back for your patience. Very, very true. Very true, Beam Slam. And, so it's... I think all of these games work well together in that I would disagree with, I only want the most realistic, someone hardcore realistic war game. Yeah, fine. I love those too, but it's being able to get in and have fun, is also good. So I don't know, for challenge on this. And this is sort of where I'm starting out with this and talking about some of this. Difficulty levels. Obviously, I can get to a standard of, strength of 10, where they're basically a standard strength of 8. But unfortunately, the AI isn't playing any harder. I don't know if the AI would have more units if they last turn or earlier this turn. If we were playing on a harder difficulty or not, I'm just not sure. Okay, we're going to attack here with our tank destroyers. And we're going to use our infantry here. Well, we took them down. We're still reasonably well dug in against all of these units here. Like I say, had they pushed up here with the infantry guns, that's what this is. This is a 150 millimeter infantry gun mounted on a captured, during the Battle of France, Lorraine tractor. Turned into a mounting. Had they come up with even the Italian armor, here I know there's some more German armor in here, they could have made this a much more difficult push. We're going to use some of our few free French points to get the artillery back up. Okay, we got Patton. He's in charge here. Let's come down here. Okay, we got the infantry and assault guns. These reconnaissance. Now, the air, I forget. Okay, we haven't moved them yet this turn. Well, let's start off with... Oh, you're running out of fuel. Okay. Go home. Land. You also need to go home. Or, well, to base and land. Don't know that that's your home. Well, I guess we will use this as an nice airstrike. Okay. So the only ones immune to this artillery, so we will count on them. They've got a Stuff 42 unit there. I think we will fall back a bit. Don't have a good reason to push here now. I'd rather let them sort of come up in my trap a bit more. here. We got the artillery. Well, if these guys are going to attack, they'll attack across either the river or the bridge, which will give us a bonus. But these guys will be straight across an open field, so we'll beat again some. Well, not as much as I was hoping. And so if they use the Martyr or any other tanks they may have, all the front line, well, I guess they can try to cross the river here. These other ones that get too fast both have anti-tank support. Anti-tank support for at least 2 of these units there. Okay. I don't think we need to keep these guys back here anymore, so we're going to move them up. Probably should have mortared the other guys. Well, let's see if we can seal their fate over here. Very good. There. Forcing me out, we should see about using these heavy infantry better. I should. They stay entrenched. They have the potential of, like that, doing some damage, weakening any attack force before it gets to you. That is AA there. These guys, we're going to launch them. These guys here, we're going to reinforce them. And before we do anything, I click wrong. We're going to continue our reconnaissance right up here like this. Okay, let's see. Get away from that AA truck. Okay. Artillery a little bit. Well, it starts, P.S., with the invasion of Torch, so that would be the U.S. against Vichy forces in North Africa. So it starts with that. So you're fighting the Vichy. Now that we've occupied it, and as it was historically, the forces all the French forces switch over to being Free French. I don't quite know if there were any significant numbers of people interred French soldiers as being, too strongly associated with the Vichy camp in North Africa. I know there were definitely people, that retreated with the Germans into German territory, collaborator types. I don't know that they were so much still supporting the Germans as opposed to afraid of what's going to happen to them. Because they had earlier already supported the Germans. So I don't quite know all of their, reasoning, as it were. We can now hit there. Yeah, we can talk for a moment about Vichy. There's, okay. From my readings, and don't take this as any particular expert opinions on Vichy, because I know bits and pieces, but I don't have a solid historical background on it. But Vichy is set up as a government because Germany wanted an end to the war. And instead of trying to occupy all of France and force France to keep fighting the French forces, they were willing to get an armistice. And so that's what they got. They got an armistice. Vichy government is, the military is it's a dictatorship because the Republic, and I forget whether I think it's the Third Republic or whatever it was, the Second Republic, the Third Republic, I don't know, they go through republics a lot over there in France. Government collapses, and the ministers of the old government, in essence, because they can't hold elections and there's no longer a really sitting parliament, they put Pétain in charge, Marshal Pétain, and so he forms a government. The story, it was the third before Vichy. Thanks, UPS. I just don't keep them. After the war, the fifth after de Gaulle. Okay, good. I don't always keep the numbers straight. De Gaulle deserts. He basically, and I know I've told this before, so sorry if you've already heard it, but he's just going to see Churchill off to his plane because he was shuttling back and forth every 2 or 3 days between the French capital as it moved eventually down to Bordeaux, between London and wherever the French capital was, trying to keep the French into the war, fighting in the war. He comes down there and basically he's like, okay, realizing that, and I don't know exactly what the French government is saying, but basically that they're going to ask for terms. So he's leaving. I don't know if everyone knows that it's Churchill leaving for the last time, but he's leaving for the last time. But de Gaulle's just seeing him to the airport and waving goodbye to it. And just as the airplane is about, and this is coordinated with the British, because the French don't want him. The French government don't want him going. I mean, this is him, deserting the French government. He jumps onto the plane, onto the door in the last minute, just as the airplane takes off for England. So he deserts his position because he's now has a position in the government. I think deputy war minister or something, I forget. And takes off for Britain, and he's of course forming the Free French government. Well, okay, if the war is over, and we call it Vichy now, but it's just the next French government. If the war is over, well, eventually, things will get hopefully back to normal. Vichy is limited, the military is limited in size. In the colonies, it's sort of frozen. I don't know exactly how they're counting it all, but it's frozen as to the numbers of units that are allowed. Well, during the time from when Vichy is sort of formed and the Allies take over, there is a recruiting effort in the colonies, both of French citizens, shall we say, Europeans living in the colonies, as well as their colonial subjects are being recruited into the units, but the unit numbers aren't growing, but the size of the units grow. So like a platoon doesn't get any more squads necessarily, but gets an extra 10 guys kind of thing. They're growing all this and hiding these numbers from the Germans. That's the big point, is they're hiding it from the Germans. So they're hiding what's going on. They're trying to arm up, equip up to be the French army of the future. Well, things go sort of sour with Britain, because Britain attacks Vichy primarily in attacking the French fleet. Britain is demanding that the fleet go to either Britain or a neutral port, like an American port, and be interred, because they don't want it in German hands. Maybe they would settle for going off to the Caribbean or someplace way outside of German hands. So they attack the French fleet, sink a bunch of ships, kill a couple thousand, I think, French sailors. This really pisses off Vichy. And understandably, it pisses them off. Now, the French Navy has sort of been frozen, in size. No new building of ships, during this time, whatnot, but more or less frozen. The Vichy Air Force continues. They've actually, since the fall of France, have assembled a bunch of aircraft that they had gotten from America, and they used some of the bombers to go bomb Gibraltar after the French attack at oh boy, I'm blanking on the name. Maybe somebody where they attacked in North Africa. I'm blanking. As soon as somebody says it, I know I'll remember it. Didn't they finish one? I don't think so, Hedge, but I could be wrong. Like I say, I'm not the biggest. Somebody knows. I know, like the Richelieu. I think it's the Richelieu ends up going to America after, Vichy is now just truly a puppet government, occupied Vichy. Germany occupies all of Vichy France, and that's when Vichy is truly a puppet government of Germany. Prior to the occupation, they're the unoccupied. Now they're in a lesser position, to the Germans. They're not quite puppets, but we're going to attack here just to mess with these guys some. Keep them from just being able to come up around here and get too deep in there. So the Richelieu is, after the French are fully into the Free French camp. So the Germans occupy and disarm all of the rest of the Vichy units remaining in France after the torch landing starts. And it is a scramble affair. I remember years ago reading a case where, one of the SS occupying headquarters in, France, nearish to the Vichy border, basically someone comes into the headquarters and say, okay, everybody, go get your guns. What? I'm a typist. I'm a clerk. No, everybody go get your guns. We're going to go occupying. So with pistols, rifles, whatever, all German forces possibly available just rush down into Vichy France, try to get hold of the fleets. But the French, the ones that are still in Toulon Harbor, the main French port down there, naval port, Germany sinks most of them. I mean, not Germany. The Vichy Navy sinks most of the fleet before Germany can get their hands on them. They get their hands on a couple of ships that are in dry dock, and and one that may have been tied up to a pier somewhere that they get on, but nothing significant naval wise. These are some destroyers or light cruisers or something, just a few ships that really don't end up hurting Germany much. So after the Americans get in and do the torch landings, now there is absolutely no reason for the Vichy army, shall we say, to want to try to defend its territory from the Allies, because Germany has fully gone in and occupied all of France. The Vichy existed to keep Germany from occupying the rest of France. Britain had already invaded and fought. There was, including Free French Foreign Legion units fighting Vichy French Foreign Legion units. The only time the Foreign Legion fought the Foreign Legion, is when the British go in and occupy Syria and Lebanon. They do that earlier than this. Then America coming. Well, I don't. Well before the Torch landings, I know that. I don't know if it's before America gets into the war. They fight in and battle in and take over. Fight up to Damascus, and then the colony collapses out there. Britain's also previously invaded Madagascar, and the Vichy government had even sent down a platoon of, I think they were R-35 tanks, down to sort of help hold Madagascar. But the British are much earlier on are worried. This is after America's in it, but they go in because they're worried about Japan occupying Madagascar. So there's, I read it. It's not a big campaign, but the campaign to take Madagascar by the British, the Vichy fight there as well. But it's not like fight to the finish. It's just fight to, okay, you won, kind of thing. So. Yeah, 41 Syrian campaign. Yeah, the Fallschirmjägers. Yeah, they were Fallschirmjägers. I don't know. Could have taken the harbor. Well, I don't know that there were Fallschirmjägers ready to go in to take Toulon. But most naval ships are kept moored. Meaning they're out in the harbor. They're floating out in the harbor. Sometimes maybe like at Pearl, where they have big mooring things, pillars or posts out, permanent things out in the harbor at Pearl Harbor. That for Battleship Row, that the battleships would go and tie up against them. So you need a boat to get from the ship to shore. The ships aren't like docked up along the docks most of the time, so they're sort of sitting out in the harbor. So you're not going to parachute onto the tops of the deck of a ship. And it doesn't take too much, a small little charge, to blow a few holes and just, without damaging the ship. They're not like blowing the ships up because they don't want to wreck the harbor and kill civilians. They're not, including maybe the sailors on it. So they're not like blowing the ships up. They're just blowing charges to sink the ship. So most of the sailors may still be on the ship and just go boom, 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 rumble below, and sort of like when they blew up the Tirpitz or whatever. The ship just sort of settles to the bottom of the harbor. It's not like a lot of people get out away from where the explosion is at the bottom of the hole, and you just fill the hole up with water and it just sits there. Well, thanks, Chrononite. And so so even if they paratrooped into Toulon, Toulon as the British used to call it, I know, harbor, that's, like I say, the main, it's been since back into the 18th, probably into the 17th century, the main Mediterranean port for the French Navy. These ships are out there. So even if you're parachuting into the port region, you're still not on the ship to capture it, to take it. You get the rare example of during the Napoleonic Wars, in which the French cavalry charged the Dutch ships and capture the Dutch Navy, because the Dutch Navy is icebound in their port at the time. So there's paintings of it, inspired by descriptions of it, of cavalrymen charging across the ice and capturing the ships before the sailors can set fire or whatever to the ships. So the French get a hold of the Dutch fleet at that point. But it's historically very hard to successfully capture many ships in port, even if you're capturing the port otherwise more or less intact, because there's good reasons, like I say, if you have a big magazine or something shore based, you don't want to blow it up and send probably explosive shells flying across the area that are eventually going to blow up themselves and cause a lot of damage. And it also takes a long time to rig things like cranes and piers and warehouses that store non-explosive stuff, and you don't want to burn down the whole place, so you're just sinking the ships. So it's very hard to capture large numbers of ships. So basically all of the French forces, most of the French forces are not pro-German. Notice I'm saying most. I know about the Charlemagne Legion and whatnot that is part of the SS, but most of the French forces are not pro-German. They are maybe anti-British because of various things. Definitely many of them, and many of those that do go sort of fight in those that volunteer to fight for the Germans or for the Nazis or however you want to say it on the Eastern Front, they're anti-Bolsheviks. Whether they're really pro-German or not, they're more anti-Bolsheviks. So it's like, yeah, most of these forces are flipping over to being Free French forces. Particularly the officers try their best to maintain their French uniforms, but very quickly they are at first just given American equipment, and then more and more American uniforms, American equipment as in rifles and artillery pieces. That's what get ammunition supplies for. To the point that they're getting Shermans and whatnot from the Americans. And they're taking their like Salma metal plate that was put on front of the French tanks, taking them off and bolting them onto the Shermans or whatever to try to keep that kind of thing. So yeah, sort of they're trying to keep as much Frenchness as they can, while they are really, yes, becoming a puppet of America, if you will. And not, they're a puppet of America, but not a reluctant one or a conquered one. It's more like they're volunteering for all of that. Okay, let's see. What have I forgotten? Okay, you're dug in there. Yeah, we're keeping you dug. You're dug. Yeah. Yeah, I know there's a lot of forces dug in. No, we're just staying dug in. Bringing up. Well, here, we'll do this. Yeah, I think, okay, yeah, no, this isn't one of our core units, so reinforce that. Free French tried to preserve their independence. U.S. was treating Vichy like the enemy, and thus the French imperial interests were hostile. Well, America has had difficulty with what it saw as colonialism. Or maybe I should say imperialism. That'd be the right term. America takes over the Philippines, but even in doing so, way back, at the conclusion of the Spanish-American War, but even then, it's set up as a protectorate with, I believe it was set to be 1945 as their eventual, early on as their eventual Independence Day kind of thing, granting independence. So, yes, America's expands across its continent and whatnot. And it is not hostile to the idea of protectorships, but it's definitely not pro, the British Empire or the French Empire. So, there's not entirely, there's sort of an ideological problem there. But there's also, because I've been doing a little bit of reading, just a few articles, on the Dutch trying to preserve the Dutch East Indies as a colony after World War II. And I'm thinking, how deluded are the Dutch people to think that they're going to be able to hold on to all of this? I just don't understand it. Because there just doesn't seem to be the will. Let's move up to here because we'll get better fire support in the future. There just doesn't seem to be the will, whether there's the economic and military ability to, suppress the insurgencies out there in the Dutch East Indies. And so, it's after World War II, it just is not a thing that to me seems viable. But that is, of course, me looking back on it through, modern eyes, and not just entirely being in their shoes. Their armored car, way up there. To I think it's getting time to push back on these forces. Yeah. Okay, the Italian fighters are back. A green light to get South Vietnam to pass. Get South Vietnam to pass to the French. Yeah, well, you know, that's another interesting thing with with Vichy going on. I didn't touch on it, but basically there is a unopposed Japanese military invasion of Indochina. There's a bit of negotiation going on, but eventually the Germans the Japanese just sort of go, yeah, no, we're occupying, come in. And they come in and invade the forces there, and I think they'd been reinforced a bit. Just go back into their barracks. And the Japanese let them go back into their barracks and stay in their barracks fully, to the best of my knowledge, fully armed. So, you know, whether it's their rifles or machine guns, their artillery pieces, they keep all of their equipment and they just sit there. And they just keep sitting there through basically the whole war. There might have been some that, I'm trying to remember, might have been evacuated out to Madagascar, but not much. So most of the war, they are just there. Even once Vichy, you know, is, you know, occupied by the Germans and the Free French are in full going, the Japanese get involved into, shall we say, a light, counterinsurgency warfare, because the Vietnamese under Ho Chi Minh sort of start their counterinsurgency against the Japanese. The Americans even supply them with some equipment parachuted into some of that against local French, or against French desires. And so when the Japanese are surrendering, in a lot of cases, they're surrendering them in Indochina. They're surrendering themselves to the Vichy forces that have been in place, living in their barracks. You know, I mean, they get to go out of their barracks, you know, I don't know whether they're wearing uniforms or not, but unarmed to go to this, you know, go to the market or whatever as individuals. But as, you know, unit formations, they're all stuck in barracks. To the best of my knowledge, none of them are interred in any sort of prisoner of war camp. So it's sort of a unique setting of what's going on there. So the anti-colonial agenda was not fanatically pursued. No, it wasn't fanatically pursued. Not in any case that it was fanatically pursued. But it is a core tenet of America policy, shall we say. Now, I don't know in Indochina, you know, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, those modern countries, but I know in the Dutch East Indies, for about a year, so sometime into 1946, some of the main forces holding down the Dutch East Indies are Japanese army units. They basically, in essence, go over to service under their original commanders, go into their service, and now go from anti, because there are not too much in Indochina or in Dutch East Indies supported by the Allies weapons drops, but there are insurgencies that are against Japan. The Japanese sort of get permission. Oh yeah, no, the Dutch, there's like 5 guys show up on an airplane, Dutch guys in Dutch uniforms or whatever, show up on an airplane here, and the Japanese are all like, well, we're ready to surrender to you. Yeah, keep your weapons, guys. And they actually not just keep their weapons and keep in barracks, but actually start working on counterinsurgency operations again for the Dutch for a while. Now this is just transitional to getting in Dutch forces, because I think the Dutch try to hold on until 47 or 48. I'm just going off memory, so I'm sure I'm wrong on some of this. So for a while they're actively using, not like everywhere in what modern day Indonesia, but in several locations where it's somewhat remote. Some of them are near some of the oil fields, and the Dutch just don't have forces to get in there in any time soon, because obviously everything's wrecked. Back in the Netherlands, back in the Dutch East Indies and whatnot. And remember, the Japanese weren't kind to their kind to any of their prisoners of war. More kind maybe to the Europeans than what they were to the Chinese, but yeah, they weren't kind to them forces. So yeah, it's a weird sort of situation in imperial colonies post World War II for a while there. The Vichy disarmed in 1945, and the Japanese took over. Some French troops escaped to the mountains to wage guerrilla war in the end. When the war ended in Potsdam, Vietnam was divided between China, UK, French. Viet Minh, I guess, was in control until the Allies came, when French general was parachuted into Vietnam as representative so that they will not be robbed from their colonies. Yeah. So it's an interesting sort of tale. Okay, can we get down? No, we can't get down to that guy with our fighter, but we can at least get into the region. We're going to send you. I don't know when you last refueled. It's been a while, so we're going to send you back up to get refueled. Yeah, it's okay. 50. I know it was fairly quickly. It wasn't like the French who fought the full Indochina War, going on, their version of Vietnam. The British really don't have a strong intention of keeping like Malaya, but they want to defeat the insurgency there because they don't like the insurgents, shall we say, would be my... they might be thinking of trying to keep Singapore, but not... We're not terribly great. Okay, well, we need to push on... I'm not so much worried about these... Well, I'm not worried about many of these guys here, but what we're going to do here is... Yeah, to eliminate this as a viable force. Okay, so we'll move up our reconnaissance a little bit closer. We have 2 Italian units there. As you can tell, I'm just fascinated by history, and I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm getting some details wrong, because I hadn't prepared for anything talking about the subject, but I just love talking about all of it. Okay, we're going to move you down to support this. And that's why I was very much at the start of playing today thinking Slytherin, because it's why I love playing these games, because it connects irks me with history. Do here is we're going to also border with our heavy. We're actually going to attack here, though we're not going to pursue. Even if they fall back, we're not going to pursue. Now these Martyr 3s, because there's different versions of Martyr 3s. These are armed with the Soviet 76 millimeter gun that they captured, and of course they're on, some people call them captured, they're not captured 30 Czech tanks. They're produced in the Czech factories, for sure, but the 38T is only just adopted by the time that the Germans take over the factory in the rest of Czechoslovakia in early 1938. They've only just been adopted, and very, very few of them have been made, and I don't think any of them delivered to the Czech army at the time. What they capture are 35Ts. So these are produced under German supervision, but captured guns and captured ammunition from Russia have been put together. And that 76 millimeter gun, the Russians specifically had it as a dual-purpose gun, both as a tank destroyer as well as an 76 millimeter infantry support, firing high explosive rounds, as opposed to like the Pak 36 or the Pak 40, or I forget the name of it, but the Russians made a licensed, not just like got it the plans and captured one or something, but a licensed copy of the Pak 36, but they made it and chambered it in their 45 millimeter caliber. Parts weren't necessarily swappable between them, but they were, licensed copy that. But also one of the main motorcycles and sidecar combinations that the Russians use are licensed copies of German motorcycles. So this is all how close the Nazis and the communists were is really interesting, and a lot of industrial trades and whatnot going on. And so this does make a decent anti-tank or anti-infantry unit or weapon system, but doesn't have the armor really for good tank use. To retake control and lost. Yeah. Oh yeah, I would say that they lost their counterinsurgency war, but it wasn't as anything hard fought or big a struggle as the American Vietnam War or the French Vietnam War, if you will. Vietnam 1946. The war begun by Stein-Tonneson should be fascinating to read. That probably would be. Okay, we have up here an anti-aircraft gun. We got them pushed back. I'm not going to use them as we're going to reinforce here since they're not my core element. We're going to do that, but we're going to move up this since we can. We're going to try to keep them from moving in too much, try to shoot down our aircraft. Only rearguard actions after World War II definitely seem odd given the extent to which colonialism was already seen as immoral or unsustainable before the war. Interesting statement. I would not say the majority opinion in any of the European powers would have thought colonialism was immoral or unsustainable prior to the start of World War II. At least that would be my assessment, the majority opinion. Obviously, there's some people somewhere thought it was either immoral or unsustainable. And you have Italy trying to grow its imperial powers in places, well, within Europe. You have them taking Albania as an imperial action. You have them taking, Ethiopia. You have them wanting to get European colonies. I would say, even with the Spanish Civil War, Spain thinks it's going to hold on to its colonies that it still has. Portugal, it thinks it's going to continue to hold on to its colonies it still has. Obviously, it's lost Brazil after the Napoleonic Wars. There's a whole other story I won't go into there. But the Dutch I don't think the Dutch see their, before World War II starts, their colonial enterprise as immoral. I think they see it as civilizing barbarians. Whether you consider them barbarians or not, that's another question. But I'm right at this moment talking about their perspective of their colonial possessions. Britain, France, I don't see them thinking their empires are unsustainable at the time. I'm not just taking like Churchill's view, because obviously he's a staunch imperialist, but I would say both the liberal and conservative parties, which were the majority, which make up the great majority of Britons at the start of World War II, their voting patterns, neither of them are even considering giving up their empires. They, I don't see that as a consideration before the start of it. Now, after the war, that's different. Japan was going imperial, when it takes Korea and takes the island of Formosa. Now we know it as Taiwan. But China's going imperial, and it's still going imperial, taking Tibet and whatnot. You could argue Manchuria, Manchukuo, whether that's Chinese imperial. The Manchus conquered China in a way, but was Manchuria? I mean, China just very recently, as in the last few days, tries to claim they're not an imperial power. Well, that would be sort of like saying, hey, European empire, you're imperial. No, we're not. We just control Europe. Right. China itself is an imperial, and it's been that way so long, and its fracturing has just been temporary. To the different factions, warlords or whatnot at times. So they think of themselves as the central power thinks of themselves as a unified country, where you have, Cantonese speakers and Mandarin speakers and whatnot, and then plus other real ethnic minorities in there, and ethnic minorities into the millions, of one particular group, in what we would think today as core China, let alone what you're thinking of the Uyghurs. So China isn't anti-imperialism. They're anti-European imperialism of them. Yeah, that's for sure. Now, I'm just trying to analyze the world, not trying to moralize here on it, and in one way or another. So, and Germany's trying to increase its imperial power. There's a whole the Deutsches Kolonialbund in Germany that has hundreds of thousands of members, is trying to get its colonies back that it's lost during World War I in Africa, primarily, though they wouldn't mind picking up their colonies they lost to Japan. But the Germans want to colonize eastward, to that place once called Poland, that was going to become, just part of Germany, and then continuing to move eastward. So they're thinking imperial conquests. Maybe, the mainline Nazi movement, maybe not. The main Nazi movement is not really trying to, wanting to get its colonies back in Africa, but there is the sort of subset of stuff. I don't know if most of you know, I make mods for another game made by a different company, and one of them is called some very significant mods. One of them is called Tanganyika, and it looks in depth at Nazi Germany's involvement with its former colonial possessions and its movement to get them back and what they were trying to do. So I know a fairly good detail about some of that, but they were definitely going east with the mainline Nazi movement. The Soviets, and I'm calling them that for they're trying to set up a Soviet empire, a people's republics of wherever, and expand. So now the Great Depression is thought of something that is going to happen, people are going to get through, but not as at least as my view of it, as, again, I'm talking mainline thinking, because I'm sure you'll find both intellectuals and just the man on the street that will, have other opinions. And they might be a significant, 10-20% of people. I'm not trying to say that they aren't big movements, but they're not the majority of opinions. So, yeah, that would be my estimation of what's going on. And prior to World War II, you do not have the sustainability of an insurgency movement because, compared to Europe, is because of control of arms and munitions, okay? You are not able to get, an insurgency somewhere. It is not able to get and manufacture large numbers of arms, large numbers of munitions, bullets, or explosives to sustain an insurgency movement. And I would say, not that some of the empires weren't doomed, because Britain morally is not willing to truly do a boot on India's neck to keep them in. This is why Gandhi's campaign works. You can talk about whatever Britain did bad here or there, the famine in Bengal and whatnot. Yeah, but they're morally not going to put the boot on people's necks that are to the level of keeping an unwilling Indian population subject to them. They're going to try to keep, and they do for a while, try to keep an empire in India, yes, but they're not willing to do that. An unwilling people. But they're not, no one's able to sustain, because you can look at the various, Northwest frontier and some of the other places, not all of them are on the Northwest frontier, some of the, edges of the British colonial empire, you're not able to sustain it. It is only the Soviet Union and then latterly the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, willingness to supply arms, munitions, and explosives and other support to insurgencies around the world that truly doom European colonialism. Now, it was already the countries like, we're talking about the Netherlands, and I know this is going very far, sorry, it's very far afield from North Africa. I'll get back to this after this one thing, and I'll stick on topic here. But yes, the Netherlands were exhausted and probably incapable of holding down all of Dutch East Indies. But they could have held Bali. Bali probably, and I don't know, but I'm guessing they probably could have done a Hearts and Mind campaign in a place like Bali and go, hey, do you want to be controlled by your Islamic neighbors, or do you want to stay a colony of us? They'll probably go, we'll stay the colony of you, Dutch guys. You're not perfect, but you're probably going to be better than them. They might have been able to go, oh, hey, we're going to hold, I don't know, the island of Jakarta or something. I know that's sort of the major population, and concentrate their efforts there. Britain could have easily held someplace like Singapore, because it's, they both, one being part of a trading empire is valuable to the people of Singapore, enough of them, and it's a geographical location that they could hold. that's entirely different. Being able to, after the ruin of, being exhausted and having rationing in Britain, being able to hold Singapore is entirely different than trying to hold the subcontinent of India. You can see the scale. But with a major European power, the Soviets, putting weapons in the hands of insurgents anywhere that they could, ultimately dooms it all. Part of what I was thinking, the evidence is pretty clear that they would lose India. Well, see, that's India, but that isn't Africa, and that isn't places, like we'll call it at the time Rhodesia or South Africa or even Kenya. The British basically, I would say, and I'm not an expert, so I'm maybe talking out my ass here, win the insurgency against the Mau Maus in Kenya. But they are more themselves exhausted and realize that they're not going to hold Kenya. But they could have, except for, like you say, the Soviets dumping weaponry everywhere else and continuing to do so. And they also decide not to. So they could have easily held selected points around. So I would go. Hello, Racer SK. Okay, back to World War II, back to North Africa. So we are getting ready. Now, we're not going to put you on the train. We'll move you up to here. We're going to get ready to go on the counteroffensive, but unlike the AI, I want to do this in a well-supported method here. Attack here, counterattack there, weaken that. Sort of waiting for these guys to bump into me here and then counterattack, but we're going to deal with these Italians here before we push on this point, other than sort of closing in on here. Kasserine, yes, Kasserine Pass right here. Yes, we're continuing this. We are on turn 12 of 40. I've been talking too much, but don't worry, we'll continue to play. I just love talking about history, and especially with people who appreciate it, like basically all of you here, even if you're not experts on a particular area, field, or time period, or whatever of history. I love talking with you, and I love your inputs on it. That is, not so much here because time of day, like now it's almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but sometimes for my own streams, and well, I guess I will also put links to it. Sometimes for my own streams, my alarm goes off an hour before the stream, and it's in the morning, and I don't really feel like doing it, but get a half an hour or so into the stream, I'm loving hanging out with you guys playing games. And mentioning that, if you haven't already, you can follow my Twitch channel. Like I say, I mostly stream on the weekends for myself, not for Slytherine. And I also, of course, have a YouTube channel where you get more history talk while playing Matrix and Slytherines, plus other games, and mostly history, not entirely. Thank you very much. Do you have any M10? Yes, we do. We right here. M10, Wolverine, the American Tank Destroyer. So we are using that. We are getting ready. Once I get, because we have our Patton commanding our Sherman unit here, once we get this sort of closed up here, we may try to push into here, but definitely get this closed up. We'll push in and try to do that. Yeah, for its day, it was a good tank destroyer. For its day. And that's what you really have to evaluate all weapons in the context that they were used and created. Yep, I think we're ready. Yep. Okay. Italian fighters versus our British Spitfires. Okay, now they're putting artillery on our infantry fire to hopefully, for their sake, coordinated attack on our engineers. But okay, and that would end them if this other unit moves up and takes them or attacks them. Yep. Yep. Like I say, the AI would have been much more effective had they coordinated their movements a bit better. So here, they're even giving us, because they can move it next to my anti-tank unit and this other infantry that'll be able to coordinate attacks on all of them. I'm a tourist guide to the Kasserine Pass, but just a quick local history. Yeah, that's true. Ah, but what I'd be sort of like Patton, talking about, you know, when the Romans fought the Carthaginians, and everybody would want to know about, yeah, but what about Patton and Rommel? No, but, you know, talking about the ancient battles. What is PS saying? Is a situation kind of what you're talking about with Singapore or Bali. There were some islands northwest of Madagascar that, yeah, what is it? Reunion and one other, yeah. Or is this the Seychelles you may be talking about? I don't know. Madagascar, the French held as colonies. They did a plebiscite. The inhabitants of all the islands opted for independence except for one. The islands that went independent formed the Comoros, right? The other island, Mayotte, remains a French colony overseas. And probably that's, yeah, okay, it's the Comoros. Yeah, that's probably the one island doing better than the rest. My guess, but just my guess. Yeah. My own editorializing, and you know I do this, colonialism in and of itself is not a bad thing. It always has a negative consequence. But the mere fact that it has some negative consequences doesn't mean it in and of itself is a bad thing. Now we can look at terrible examples of colonialism would be, oh, I don't know, the Belgian Congo, and especially the early days, you know, when it was sort of more of a private preserved colony of King Leopold and not a civilly administrative colony of the Belgians. It gets better, you know. So, you know, there's better and worse and whatnot. So just because it's colonialism doesn't mean it's bad. Now, there's always be negative elements. I'm not saying there won't be, because you know you can point out with any of them, well, this thing is bad. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that what was going on prior to the Europeans showing up was better. You know, so, and I'm not saying that some particular colonial enterprise somewhere isn't a net negative for those people to this day. You know, it's not always a good thing, or how it was done, where it was done. Not putting any sort of blanket statements that way, but it's blanket statement that it's not always a bad thing. It's free. We have. Oh, hey, Ben Bishop. We have a few Free French forces. This is by the time Kasserine happens, all the forces in North Africa are Free French forces. Earlier on during the torch landings, yes, you have Vichy forces. I don't think you have any Free French forces involved with the torch landings. You have a few Free French generals or other officers making covert contacts with the local Vichy officer types, but no Free French units. And when the Free French showed up at Dakar earlier on, that's a colony down at the edge of Africa, you know, sub-Saharan Africa, show up down there, the colony sort of said, bugger off, and the Free French retreat, because they weren't really trying to invade and conquer the Vichy. They were just sort of hoping to show up and have a local revolt. Now, down in the French Congo and Cameroon area, that very early on goes Free French. And it's not, I don't think it's an intimidation factor by the British, but since it's sort of surrounded by British colonies, they didn't feel that they were in any threat of a Vichy-led counter-invasion or whatever force that they might have been, like in North Africa or some other place. So yeah, these are all a few Free French units. Okay, well, we know that there should be a unit there and there may be a unit there. So we're going to move to here. Okay, and expose, good. Here. These guys are going to be down here. These guys are... I'm going to be smart here. Gamer's trying to be smart. Do some artillery prep. On this Italian unit. And then Patton's going to use his tanks. And block them out. Oh, they just fell back. Okay. Yep, we'll close that up. We will use the Free French here. Bad with Free French early on. They were a local ruler, was understandably hostile to fascism, racism. Yeah. Don't doubt that. You know, that's sort of in that sort of Cameroon, Central African Republic of the modern country, French Congo sort of area that does go fairly early. Free French. Guadeloupe, the island over in the Caribbean, they have that's where the French carrier ends up. They stay Vichy until Vichy is occupied, you know, by Germany. So, you know, post-torch landings, they come. Only then do they come over to the Free French, and you know, Big Daddy America, please fix our carrier for us. I think that's what everyone in Europe should start calling America, Big Daddy America. But that's just me. Editorializing them. Well, then the mountains, I can't attack them. Nah, that's right, they're too far up in the mountains. Yeah, this isn't actually a bad idea here of what's going on. In that this is too much of a mountain hex that really you can't, because yeah, it's not like artillery that we're, you know, bombarding into it. Too rough. They're estimating here whether it should or shouldn't be too rough, but it is just too rough for us to get in there properly with tanks or other motorized vehicles. Okay, well, this force here, well, let's zoom back out. I sort of play on this that I hope you can see the overall context level. They're strong only to fight Casablanca or Oran. After this, they surrender quickly once that happens. So it was in the past, but the U.S. wants us to solve our own. Yeah, you're right, Beam Slam. Things change. But still, whose nuclear umbrella does most of Europe live under? You know. But you're right, things are changing. Okay, let's try to put the boot in. Need to do some reconnaissance. Now over here, now I may be pushing out a little too fast, a little too hard. We're going to push on. Let these guys sit over here, maybe they'll get more reinforcements. Got around to invading Guadeloupe before then. Yeah. Yeah, sugar does, even, you know, to this day, still has a significant value, and yes, the various French islands there were economically valuable in that sense, but I really don't think it's a situation these guys are talking about. I thought they were going to be. At least this is a 57mm gun. these guys. Now we're going to circle around into the hills. And see how the Germans here have a much stronger position, but what we're going to do is spend our 10, because we have a huge amount of points over here, spend 10 points for a, because these are Rangers, a raid that may not be very effective, but this will not hurt this unit, so they won't take any damage. So it was a sort of, no-lose scenario, if you will. Here. Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Eraser. Things don't always turn out well. Everything has a negative, every action or inaction in politics and diplomacy and war and colonialism, everything has a even if it's a positive action, always has negative consequences, either at its time or later on. It always does. That doesn't, but even inaction always has, had the French mobilized and put some forces, into the Rhineland when Germany remilitarizes them. They had already, and I would say rightfully so, in 1935, the Saarland, and finally got rid of all French occupation. Okay, the French are gone, but it's still, the Rhineland is supposed to be an unmilitary occupied zone. Have your factories, even build tanks. Well, tanks were banned by the Versailles Treaty, but build rifles or whatever. In your own territory, do what you want, as long as you're not breaking the treaty, because you signed the treaty. Do what you want there, but stay unmilitarized. So you don't invade us or the Belgians. That's all it is. Just stay unmilitarized. Well, because it also means it's no fortifications. Okay, seems reasonable in a post war world that they agreed to. Well, when Hitler reoccupies it with military forces, France does nothing but make some diplomatic statements. Had they done even a modest force in there to go, no, 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 that could have collapsed the Hitler regime, possibly. Not likely. I'm not saying it's likely, but it's a possibility. Because that might have just given a few military officers the balls, shall we say, to try to do a coup against him or something. Might have. Again, I'm not saying likely, just saying might have. But it could have really put a strain on Nazi expansion. And remember, in 1930, because this happens in 1936, it's not, the Kristallnacht doesn't happen until 1938. So you might have, even in a Nazi Germany, it might have looked more like fascist Italy, that they had the king and the fascists were not in total power. They had the majority of power in Italy, but they weren't in total power. So, that inaction in 1936 has a negative consequences. Now, it might have started a Franco-German war. Millions would have died, and we'd all be going, hey, those stupid French guys shouldn't have started that war. But that might have been the Franco-German War of 1936, 38, 2 years or something, not a world war. So there's always a negative reaction or negative consequences to whatever you do or you don't do. You just got to try to look at and learn from history what's going to have most likely the best outcome. Invaded the French islands of Canada in some sort of spectacular exodus. Some good. Didn't know about that, P.S. about de Gaulle invading those things. They leave Russia to invade Ukraine, and that's it. No one in Europe says a word. Same thing with Czechoslovakia in 1939. Yes, that kind of thing, Eraser. That's the kind of thing that I'm worried about is, yeah, it's not good that Russia invades Ukraine because, the Crimea in Ukraine is part of Ukrainian territory. But if that's all it's going to be, well, okay. I don't think the world needs to blow up over it. Whatever major war would have happened. But if Russia keeps pushing, and someday the Allies have been saying, no, don't do this, no, don't do this, no, don't do this. We really mean it this time. Well, not this time, not. But one time they'll push too hard and create another world war. That's what I worry about. That's really what I worry about. Scholarship is pretty firm in saying that democratic states were too soft in dealing with the fascist powers. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, they were, but I think you're looking back at fascist powers, because you got to realize until 1935 the fascist powers were allied with the democratic states. France and Britain were a strong ally of fascist Italy until fascist Italy invades Ethiopia. In 1935, Italy is working on an additional alliance with fascist Austria, and we'll call it nationalist, I'm just calling it that for the moment, nationalist Hungary, in the Three Powers Pact, in an anti-Nazi alliance, an anti-German alliance. To add to, and it's only when the British and French, as the Italians would say, the fascists at the time, turn on Italy when Italy invades Ethiopia. Does Mussolini only at that point start to move into the Hitler camp? And it's only start to. It takes years to get there. So before that, he's actively, and it's signed in 1936, he's actively setting up with Schuschnigg in Austria, the Fatherland Front, which were fascist, because their main opponents were the Nazis in Austria. So it's a faction between fascists and Nazis in Austria, conflict primarily. And the nationalist in Hungary, he's setting up an anti-German alliance, an anti-Hitler alliance. So you're again sort of looking back at it as opposed to looking at it at the time. Appeasement was the standard response challenge, according to Paul Sugar, failed. It only worked twice in 200 years. Well, appeasement, and I've given talks before on my thoughts that, okay, they can. I think we're just going to keep pounding on with our engineers here. I would not call what, I'm saying I would not call what happens over the Sudetenland appeasement. That is what it comes to be called. I would call it, from Britain's point of view, a realization, or at least they perceived that they were unprepared to fight Germany. Whether they were or not, that's another question. But they saw it as they were unprepared, and they, quote unquote, appeased them in an attempt to buy time to rearm. That's how I'm interpreting what's going on with Chamberlain. I know it's called appeasement today, but I'm seeing that as differently now. So that's why I was looking more at France in 36 with the Rhineland than France and Britain in 38 over the Sudetenland, because the equations, including German rearmament in those two years approximately, is significant, and with no significant levels of rearmament by Britain during those 2 years, but you get huge amounts of rearmament starting in 38 in Britain to preparing for a likely war with Germany coming. So I would not call it appeasement. I would call it more like, oh shit, this is going to get serious. We're not prepared. We can't save Czechoslovakia even if we go to war. So whether we can buy time to rearm is what they do. That's how I'm interpreting it. And I've definitely in past talked much deeper on it, but we're staying on, as long as we're more or less staying on the topic of World War II, I'm good while we're playing here.